We have a master class running a little late, so people will be joining us as they finish up here. Hi, my name is Melissa Silverstein. I'm one of the co-founders of the Athena Film Festival. Welcome to On the Front Lines of Change, Amplifying Women's Voices. Be amazing conversation with women who've come from all across the country to be a part of this. On behalf of the Athena Center for Leadership Studies and Women in Hollywood, I want to thank you for being a part of this festival, a celebration of women and leadership. We could not have produced this festival without the support of our sponsors. You've seen their names rolling, but they will roll again. And our honorary host committee, and a special thank you to them all. In particular, I want to thank our founding sponsor, Regina K. Scully of Artemis Rising Foundation, as well as the Ford Foundation's Just Films, which is our premier sponsor. This panel today is sponsored by the Harnish Foundation as well as the Sundance Institute, and we want to thank them profusely for being a part of the Athena Film Festival. Thank you. We're kind of at the tipping point of the festival. Now we're moving into tomorrow's the last day. Is tomorrow the last day? Okay, great. And we have movies tonight at 6, movies tonight at 9, and we begin tomorrow again at noon, 3, and then our closing film tomorrow night is at 6, which is a documentary about Geraldine Ferraro. So without further ado, I'm going to bring up Lindsay Wood, who has been working with me and putting together this whole panel for the last, 3 months, and she's a strategic advisor for the Harnish Foundation, and we very much appreciate all your work. Thank you.
Hello. Thank you all for coming today. I am here on behalf of the Harnish Foundation, who sponsored today's program. The Harnish Foundation has a deep commitment to ensuring that all voices are heard and represented in media and film, and today we have one of the strongest advocates in Hollywood moderating a panel on how we can achieve just that. Previously, Keri Putnam served as president of production for Miramax Films and was executive vice president of HBO Films. In 2010, Keri joined the Sundance Institute as their executive director. Since then, she's worked tirelessly to ensure that diversity in media is not only possible, but celebrated. And as someone who has had the pleasure of getting to know her over the last several months, I can say with absolute certainty that there is no one better to lead the charge. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce our moderator and our friend, Keri Putnam.
That was so sweet. Thank you. Thank you, Lindsay, and thanks to the Harnish Foundation, to Ruth Ann, for supporting this panel and so much of this work that we're all doing. Let's give them a round of applause. While our panelists are coming up, or before our panelists come up, we're just going to run a few trailers for Athena that Melissa wanted us to run before we start. So let's roll the trailers. There are the sponsors. Yay.
Here at Barnard, I've learned the skills to think deeply and critically about everything I do.
There hasn't been a student I've met here who didn't impress me by what they were studying, what they did in their free time, what they did over breaks. I feel like I'm constantly impressed and inspired by the people I'm around here.
I feel stronger after being at Barnard, and of course, more educated, which is part of that. I feel more confident because I've learned so much.
Are we good? All right. Come on up, guys. Hi, everybody. Thank you for coming. Welcome. I'm Keri. Guys, come on up. Everyone come up, and I'll introduce you while you're here, if that's okay. Thank you all for being here. Can you hear me okay? Yes? Great. While everybody's getting seated, I thought it might be helpful for all of us up here to know a little bit about who this audience is. Can you just give me a raise of hand if you are someone who is making media, who has a film or a script or some kind of media you're trying to get made? Excellent. Good portion of the audience. Okay, thank you. That was our suspicion, but we just wanted to double check that. So it is now my pleasure. I would like to start first by giving you a little frame for what this panel is, and then it'll be my pleasure to introduce you to these incredible women who are up here with me today. So as you read in the program, this panel was inspired by Lake Bell's film, In a World. How many of you have seen that film yet? I think you'll get a chance to see it later tonight, right, Melissa? Is it? Yeah, later tonight. This is, and for those of you who haven't seen it, just a thumbnail on why it's inspiring for this panel. It's a story about, first of all, it's written and directed by a woman. But, yeah, second of all, it's the story of a woman who literally uses her own voice to remake the possibilities in a traditionally male profession and, sort of bust open what are perceived to be the boundaries. And so it is a very inspiring movie. It's a very funny movie. I think you'll like the movie. But for us, the idea of redefining the rules through women's voices was a real inspiration. And the goal for us today, we want to talk a lot about this pipeline of how it actually works. That storytellers, women storytellers, get opportunities to tell their stories, to define that pipeline a little bit, and to talk about what some of the barriers and the opportunities are along the way. And hopefully also some of the positive steps that, maybe some examples that might level the playing field. So that's our overall goal. Now I'll turn to these panelists. So I'm going to start, I guess I'll start to my left. Lydia Dean Pilcher. A wonderful producer based here in New York and a friend who I've worked with before. Lydia produced this year's Academy Award nominated Cutie and the Boxer, the documentary. Wonderful documentary. As well as the upcoming Sony Classics film The Lunchbox by Ritesh Batra, which is really a fantastic film. It played at Sundance this year, among other places. She has a long producing career, including many films with the director Mira Nair. How many, 10 or so films with Mira Nair. And she's also has her own company called Cinemosaic here in New York and is very active in the Producers Guild for Women. So I'll let her tell you more when she speaks, but that's Lydia. Next, Stacy Smith, one of the leading academics in the nation,
or world,
or the world,
right,
or the planet, the universe.
That one.
Exploring gender in media. She is a PhD professor at USC Annenberg, and she and her team have done some really groundbreaking research on women in media and on all sorts of diversity in media issues, but notably, we recently worked with Stacy and her team at Sundance on some research that we'll hear a little bit more about later in the panel about the barriers and opportunities facing women storytellers. So Stacy's also a much awarded teacher of what's the course you teach?
Media effects.
Media
effects.
Yes. Okay. Next to Stacy is Anna Holmes. Anna has written and edited for numerous publications, including the New York Times, Washington Post, Newsweek, InStyle, and the New Yorker Online. And she is also the founder of the popular website Jezebel.com. So she's got she's the editor of 2 books, including the Book of Jezebel, and she was just named a columnist for the New York Times Book Review. And she lives here in New York. So next to Anna is Lena Waithe. Oh, no, is Nina. Oh, you guys switched. Oh, very tricky. I didn't look before I spoke. Is Nina Shaw, who is a founding partner in the entertainment law firm of Dell, Shaw, Moonves, Tanaka, Finkelstein, and Lexano. I probably said some of those wrong, but that was my general. And Nina is really, she won, I think she was just awarded Entertainment Lawyer of the Year by the Hollywood Reporter this year. And she's been a sort of a mentor and advisor and a trailblazer for, you know, so many people over the years, and is a real guru about how the business works. I can't wait to hear from her. So that's Nina Shaw. And then finally on the end, Lena Waith, who is a producer of a movie called Dear White People that premiered at Sundance this year and won the Special Jury Prize. Congratulations. She's also a writer. She's developing a series called 20s that she'll tell us more about. And so as a writer and producer, she's worked on the web, and she's worked in traditional media and independent film, so she's got a great perspective on how you break in. So that's the panel. Thanks, everybody. So now I'd like to start by asking each of you, just to get the ball rolling, each of you, when we talk about opportunities for women storytellers, are we talking about a jobs question? You know, women should be hired for the jobs that are traditionally given to men? Or are we talking about the stories women tell need to be seen more because they're different in some fundamental way from the stories men tell? I'd like to just start the panel by talking about the why of this conversation. What is it? Why is it important that women tell stories and have more opportunities? I think, Lena, can I start with you?
Sure, why not? Can everybody hear me? Yep, good. All right. Hi, everybody. I think it's just important for our stories to be told by us. I think that's very important. I think the reason why Bridesmaids was such a huge deal was because you had women who were really sort of getting a chance to tell a story that I think otherwise wouldn't have been told. Unfortunately, it took Judd Apatow, I think, to really sort of put his stamp on it, to give it sort of approval. But I think when it happened, I think it really sort of spoke to many women and their experiences. And I think even for me with 20s, I think it was really about sort of getting that feminine voice that was a feminine voice of color. And it was not just that, but it was a feminine voice of color that was also speaking to the LGBT community. So those three things were very important in that I really sort of tell those stories. And so I just think when men are often given those jobs and they're telling stories that are really foreign to them, I think it's sort of unfortunate. I think sometimes there are things that sort of get lost in translations in terms of what women are going through and what's sort of happening in the world now, or what it just means to be a woman in this day and age, whether it be dealing with dating or family relationships or friendships. So I tend to tell female stories just because I like writing stories about women and things like that. Obviously in Dear White People, two of the characters are female characters and they're very unique characters. And I think that me being a producer on the film definitely gave Justin Simeon, who's a writer-director, a lot of insight into what it means to be a black woman and how maybe a black woman modulates her blackness depending on the room. And it's actually very different, I think, for black women versus black men. So I think it was just very helpful to have me on the team in terms of that film and those female characters and getting those points across.
Thank you. Nina, do you have an observation?
Well, I think it really comes down to the way we are seen versus the way we see ourselves. And that's really the core of why your voice in the room is an important voice. Now many of you may vote as an audience in terms of what you see, but ultimately I think being able to vote and tell your own stories, it's really the essence of it. When we were talking before the panel, I was saying that last night on the flight out here, I saw this film, The To-Do List, which is a film written and directed by Keri. And I contrasted it to The Way, Way Back, which I had seen a few months earlier. And they really are the same story in a way because they're a coming-of-age story, but they are told using a very similar device, but they are as different as night and day. And I think it's really very much the way Keri saw and told that story versus the way the male writing team on The Way, Way Back, which was a film I enjoyed, but it was totally a different perspective.
Anna?
Can you guys hear me? Well, I just think it's important to mainstream female voices. You know, to answer the question about whether we should be focusing on whether the storytellers are female or whether the storytellers are telling female stories, I don't think that they should be mutually exclusive. I think we should be focusing on both. With Jezebel, which started in 2007, really goal was to have women on the site talking about any number of topics, many of which were not considered female, like politics, to broadcast to our readership, which was mostly female, that women were much more multifaceted and interested in the world around them than they had been, perceived to be, at least through women's media. And I think that that's probably why that site took off so much, is because it featured women talking unapologetically about things beyond the domestic, the personal, the interpersonal, and I think that kind of extends to at least what I like to see happen in Hollywood and in television, and which I feel like I am seeing a bit, which is stories about women that are not about them being women, because I think when you think of women as being a kind of niche product, that's the sort of stuff that gets
problem.
Yeah,
right.
That's the entire problem. And I also noticed, at least with the site, to use the site as an example, is that when we had a robust discussion or discussions going on among women about any number of things, some of which were about historically female things like fashion, some of which were about electoral politics, it brought men in. And that actually was a surprise to me, and it was a surprise that there were so many men who were interested in those conversations, both witnessing them and participating in them. And so, I don't know what the numbers are in terms of male viewership of stories that feature female protagonists, but I have a lot more optimism than a lot of other people have with regards to men being interested in participating in these conversations. Maybe it's a generational thing. I don't know, but
yeah, it's nice to think it may be. I mean, I think, Stacey, I don't know if you have a comment specifically on that. I think the question of how commerciality or how the audiences are perceived by the people who are deciding on what stories get told. Will men go see a story about women versus will women go see a story about men? It's interesting.
I'd actually love to answer that question, but I promise you I'm going to do it later in this panel. So I'm going to stick to the initial question first. I think that it's both. They're not mutually exclusive, but what I think is really important is we've been looking at the top 100 grossing films over the last 5 years at the Annenberg School, and we count every character that speaks one or more word on screen. Low bar. It's a low bar. All you have to do is utter a big job, low bar. And some of my former students are actually here who's worked on these projects. And the reason why it's important is because over the last 5 years, females on screen take up less than a third of all speaking characters in popular motion picture content. Less than a third of all speaking characters. Now, interestingly enough, in the late 1940s, 25% of all speaking characters were female. That needle hasn't moved in decades. In popular film. So why is it important to have a female behind the camera? 3 things happen. 1, it increases the prevalence of females on screen, and those stories are heard. Why is it important? 50% of the population is female. The last time I checked, actually polls a little bit higher. 50% of the people that go to the box office domestically, guess what? Female, right? Polls a little bit higher, actually, according to Motion Picture Association statistics. So, more females are on screen. There's less hypersexualization on screen when you have a female behind the camera telling the story. And guess what? Females tend to hire, in the independent realm, other females as producers, writers, cinematographers, and editors. So when you have a female as a director of a motion picture, the landscape of the story changes, the way in which the story is told changes, and who's hired behind the camera changes. And in terms of commercial success, they will come if you tell those stories.
Right, I'm glad you answered that question.
Well done.
Well, I think we have the systemic barriers that we've been talking about for a long time in the business. And I'm an independent producer, and so, I always ask the question, what stories do women want to tell? Because I think there's a certain level of the business out there that's a work for hire level, and women may or may not be interested in telling those stories. But where I come from, and I'm looking to develop and create content, I'm interested in female perspectives in general, but then I think we're seeing something else right now in the landscape of our culture and our storytelling culture, which is there's more boldness and sexual frankness that we're seeing on screen, especially from young women, and it's where we are in the world right now because of technology and social media and generations of feminism that are kicking in. And I think that this is really exciting, but for me as a producer, what I find that I'm coming up against more is resistance in deeply female material.
Right. Yes, I think that is. I think that is a challenge, and I know we're going to get back to that one. I'd like to just for those of you that may not have had a chance to read about Stacey's research, I'd love to do a little bit of lay of the land for all of you. You've just hit on some of the numbers, but can you take a few moments and just overview for us where do women stand now in media and or in movies, at least, if that's what you're looking at, and maybe some of the top, in your findings, top barriers or opportunities that you think
and maybe Keri and I, we can have a conversation
hit it back and forth.
About this, because Keri really navigates this research in a way that I think is so personally relevant given what you do in commissioning this study. I just want to give you a couple of top lines to think about how women are doing in film. And when we say film, we have to define what we're talking about. I'm going to talk about top grossing fare, but more importantly, in the independent world, because I know we're going to talk about the pipeline, and it becomes really important to see where females might be falling out. So we were commissioned by the Sundance Institute and Women in Film in 2012 to do a large-scale assessment of how women are doing behind the camera as directors, writers, producers, editors, and cinematographers at the Sundance Film Festival between 2002 and 2012. That was our first report. I just want to give you a couple of findings from that study because I think it really punctuates what we need to discuss here today. If we think about directors at the Sundance Film Festival in the narrative or dramatic features arena, if we look at competition, those places where early filmmakers in their careers showcase some of their first films, only 22.2% of all directors are female from 2002 to 2012 in competition films. US films. If we move to non-competition, which often involves premiere films and all other categories at the festival, 14.5% of all directors in non-competition films are female. So we just dropped about 7%. Now if we look to top grossing films from 2002 to 2012, top 100 films, across that time frame, 1,100 movies, the percentage is 4.4%. So the reality for female directors is they face this steep fiscal cliff, 22%, 14.5%, 4.4% as they move through this pipeline. And we're going to talk, I think, about some of the barriers that might face these narrative directors in particular.
Sure. I mean, for those of you making documentaries out there, I think it's worth noting that the story for documentaries is much brighter and a little bit different.
Right.
Which we can certainly talk about if that, we'll come on to questions, if that's an area you want to speak about. I think for the purposes of kind of keeping our focus today, we'll stay on this narrative track for now. But
absolutely.
Documentary folks, rest assured, you're doing much better.
Right.
I think I think one of the things, just to clarify, when you talk about premieres at Sundance, those movies are slightly higher budget. They often have name casts. They often require accessing more financing than, let's say, that very first movie that you made with your credit card or your parents' friends or Kickstarter or whatever it is. So I think the drop from the 23% through to the 14-some% is really the same trend we're seeing in the drop from the 14% at premieres down to the 4% in the studio world. And I think one of the main barriers, if I recall, is this financial access to financial networks that are gendered, and that really means men who are making decisions about how the money is spent. And it means another thing too, which is women maybe not having the knowledge or sense of empowerment to wrangle capital, to amass capital when they're going out to financiers. And I wonder, just in talking about that issue, is that something, Lydia, in terms of just going to financiers as an independent producer, have you encountered, do you feel like there's a challenge you face either because you're bringing a woman's story or as a woman producer in getting capital that maybe a man wouldn't face?
I think that it's a challenge. I think we had interesting seminar in Los Angeles in November, a Women in Finance seminar, and there were a lot of speakers that talked about the importance of presentation and for when you go into the room to really, really deliver the perception that you can make this movie and you'll accomplish it, on time, on budget, on schedule. And I think that when you're financing, they're first of all interested in the story, of course, but there's many ways to arrive at how that story will get told. So if you're pitching yourself and your team, it's important to go in with a presentation that's going to make sense. And a lot of times you're drawing information to things that are just not in their worldview, like 50% of the audience is female out there. Things that seem very obvious, but I think we know that the people who are making decisions on content in the studios are basically greenlighting things that they want to see. And so when you're dealing with white men, most of the time, you're already starting from an uphill battle position.
That's true. Right. And, talking about the people that are making decisions, I'd love it if, Nina, you could break it down a little bit for us. Who are the pipeline players in your, in your estimation, for your clients coming into the business, trying to sell something or trying to get a job? What are the steps they have to take, and who are the people they have to work with?
Yeah, focusing on the narrative film world, and let's for a minute focus on the traditional studio world. The process of how a film comes together as it moves from the point of something that someone is willing to greenlight. Now all the creative steps have taken place for the most part, and you have a product that people want to make. Then you start this process of how do you get talent attached to the product. And by talent, I mean everything from sometimes the producers, but usually at this stage you typically have a producer attached. But then when you start talking about the director, when you start talking about all of the department heads, when you start talking about the casting, and then what starts to happen is this process of list making. And it's so funny because when we were talking about beforehand, you asked that great question, well, what's the list? And honestly, if you're in Hollywood, you know what the list is, which is basically that people will start talking. Well, is he on the list? Who's on the list? Well, the list is a list of people that the executives put together from all kinds of different sources, mainly their friends, and people who have performed well within the studio system and who would seem to make sense in terms of the subject material, although we know that that is sometimes not such a big deal. But the point is that this list then becomes the only place from which they will draw. And I have, in the past year, all the films that I've been associated with in the past year, studio films, I haven't seen a director's list with one woman on it in the past year. Just haven't. Just haven't.
And that same thing is true for network television and actually cable television. Everybody has lists. Sometimes the lists are generated by a showrunner who has their own preferred set of directors. Sometimes they're generated by the network in television. So I think it applies to television as well. And how do those lists, I mean, you said it's executives putting it together with their friends, but the agencies are involved too. Tell me why they don't represent any women, or why don't the women get on the list?
Well, the agencies will essentially, you have like kind of one guy, it's almost always a guy talking to another guy, although there are women within the agency structure, just like there are women within the studio structure, but it still strikes me that even when you have women talking to other women, how many guys are on that list as opposed to women on that list? And because the general theory is that if that movie is about, first of all, if it's a big movie and a lot of money involved in the budget, then there are typically only men in the list for that reason. Then if it's an action genre movie, then there are only men on the list because they're the only ones who can...
Most of them are these days.
Yeah, who can direct that. If it's a sequel to an existing successful film, which is the only time obviously they're going to make a sequel, then there are only guys on the list. They're just...
Even when a woman directed the
Even
first
when a woman directed the
right.
first hit, and we know which movie we're all talking about, right? And it almost becomes like a whisper campaign of, oh, have you heard about this great person? Because maybe you're having lunch one day, you're an agent and you're having lunch with a studio executive, and you start talking up your client list and talking up particular people, and then those people kind of find their way on the list. And you know, I will often say to people when I hear about the list or what the list is for a particular movie, I'll say, well, why isn't so-and-so on the list? Mm-hmm. Well, we talked about her.
Yeah, I think this is a great moment to, you know, when people think, there's one of your research findings, Stacey, was about what words get used when people think about a director. When I heard Nina say, well, if it's a big movie with a big budget, of course it'll be a man. Why is that?
Well, in the study that we did for Sundance, we sat down with 51 people and interviewed them. Actually, Kate did all the interviews. She's here and worked on the project.
Kate Pieper.
And Dr. Kate Pieper. And we asked this question, what makes a successful director? And people gave us a slew of attributes about successful directors in both narrative and documentary. And we coded all of those attributes based on previous research of masculine characteristics, feminine characteristics, and neutral. And most of the characteristics were, in fact, neutral. But something really interesting happened. In the narrative arena, there was twice as many masculine traits associated with directors than there were feminine traits, 2 to 1.
And these were decision makers and
thought leaders in the entertainment industry, in the independent space, and content creators, both seasoned as well as emerging. So twice as likely to think director and think male, or a masculine trait. What do I mean by that? Aggressive, assertive, can rally the troops, right? So it's consistent with a lot of research in the management arena that for these leadership qualities, the role, when you perceive a leader, you perceive masculine characteristics, okay? But in the documentary space, what we found was very interesting. There was no difference in the masculinization and feminization of directors when people articulated attributes about what made them successful. There's more of an egalitarian mindset. So it's not just more egalitarian access to finance, but it's more egalitarian thinking in the documentary space. So in the narrative world, when people think director, they think male. And just to piggyback on what Nina said, we also asked about this list issue. And we heard repeatedly, and you read about this in the popular press, I'm sure you've covered it on Jezebel, you hear this all the time, there's just a small pool. It's actually in this year's second report. There's a small pool of female directors that can carry a film. It's the Catherines, Bigelow and Hardwick, right? Now, let's just look at who's been at Sundance over the last 11 years. There were over 100 female directors. I should have brought my slide because we put on a black screen white names, every single female director. Is there a small pool? Fiction. The evidence suggests otherwise, right? And part of, I think, our conversation is to shift the cultural mindset and then the shift decision makers and understanding there are lots of females that can helm films successfully.
And I think that's it's a great segue to, you know, how much we rely on decision makers to shift that mindset and sort of, you know, charging those ramparts versus trying to make some different approaches to getting women's stories told. And I think all of these ladies have something to say, but Anna, do you want to start on that one?
I had a question for the other panelists, which was, I'm curious to know how many of the women in positions of power at studios seem to be aware of the issue of the pipeline and the issue of the dearth of women being given jobs.
I'd love to field that one because I've spoken to a lot of them, and I actually used to have that job or one of those jobs. So, and I won't speak about my own experience in that job at this moment, but I will say just in the course of doing this research and talking to people, I had some really interesting conversations. The agents, first of all of the women who have those jobs have decided to work inside a system. They're not working independently and, you know, trying to, you know, make a feminist point every day of their lives. They're trying to succeed within a system. And so in doing that, they have to accommodate themselves to the value systems of that system and then try to, you know, make whatever progress they can within that. So I don't think these women are out there to keep women off the list but nor do I think they're there to crusade for women.
Right.
So say that at the outset.
Yeah, because I think it's sort of, sometimes if you're a woman walking into, you know, a studio meeting, they may bring in a female executive who may not necessarily be a great thing, because she doesn't want to be the person saying, oh, I'm bringing in all the female projects. Just the way an executive of color doesn't want to necessarily walk in a project that is predominantly African-American cast, because they don't want to be the black exec trying to push forward the black project. So the unfortunate thing is that sometimes seeing that person that has the same genitalia as you or the same color as you may be sort of a scary thing, because they don't want to be pigeonholed as that kind of exec. So it's sort of a gift and a curse oftentimes.
Yeah, they want to be somebody that can be a generalist and rise to the top of whatever sphere they're working in. But the other thing I found is I spoke to a partner at an agency, woman, and I said, what do you think about this list finding that we have, and what do you think about this pipeline question? And she said, well, we at the agency can't put people on the list because the studio won't hire them. And so we can't really put a lot of women on the list because we wouldn't be doing our jobs. The studio won't hire them because they don't have that track record at the box office. And the studio executive that I spoke to, or executives that I've spoken to, said, well, we can't help if the agents don't put them on the list. What are we supposed to do? How are we? So it's kind of a conundrum in that respect. And I don't think anybody's looking to point a finger at a specific agency or studio. I think it's a sort of a systemic thing, which is why I feel eager to talk about and running the system. So I want to talk a little bit about those of you who are working independently. Maybe Lena, to start with you. How did you get your first work made, and how did the efforts you made there enable you to have more power coming into that system now that you're going to make your more conventional studio work?
I may keep it independent. I don't know. We'll see, because the conventional route is a little exhausting. Well,
that's good too.
Okay. Oh yeah, no, right. My lawyer says that to me. Well, the thing with Dear White People was that, and again, speaking as a woman, I was very aggressive, sort of when I met Justin Simeon, who I met in a writer's group back in LA, and he was working on the material at the time, and I just thought it was really fresh. I thought it was really interesting, and it definitely spoke to my experience, particularly as a black person, being that, I'm oftentimes a black face in a white space, and how I choose to walk through the world. I thought it was just a very interesting subject matter. So I literally approached him and I said, look, I think you should do something with that script, and if you do, I'll produce it. Not knowing what that meant, not knowing what a producer does, but he said, okay. He said, cool. He said, great, cool. So hence me going from being I'm still a television writer. That's what I do. That's how I pay, keep the bills on, pay the bills. But I sort of moonlighted as a feature producer because I simply asked, and I said, we should do something with this, and he said, okay. And then, obviously it was a long journey, but we really decided to work on the script and make sure it was as tight as it could possibly be, because especially when you're an other of any kind, you have to be twice as good, you have to be great. There's no room for mediocrity. There's no room for it in my life, period, but as a woman of color, there really can't be any room for it, because I just won't get noticed and I won't get an opportunity to even go in for a job. So we made sure the script was airtight, and then we had a table read for it, which was pretty electric and amazing and exciting. And then Justin said we were going to do a concept trailer. So we took all of our tax returns. Instead of getting couches from IKEA, we got we put together this concept trailer, which again, we knew it had to be amazing, it had to be special, because there's a lot of clutter on the web, and this was our first, neither one of us had made a movie before. The subject matter was very touchy, and we knew we wanted to sort of do it in a very satirical Wes Anderson type of way, which they usually don't let black kids do. So we sort of decided to put forth our vision online, and when we did, it sort of went gangbusters, and we sort of raised over $50,000 in 3 days on Indiegogo, and we were on CNN, and next thing we knew, Stephanie Elaine Bray, who was an amazing woman in the industry, who executive produced films like Boys in the Hood, Black Snake Moan, and Hustle and Flow, called me unceremoniously one day on a Tuesday when I was watching The View in sweats, and she's like, I want to come and be the executive producer of your film. And I said, okay. And really it's actually interesting because we really are a producing team of women. We have one other guy, it's like myself, Stephanie Elaine, F.E.T. Brown, and Lee. So Justin is surrounded by women producers. And I think the thing about us is that we do lean in. We don't take no for an answer. We do ask those questions. And it's sort of really been an interesting journey. But the thing was, I mean, no matter what, the answer is always to be great. Whatever it is you're doing, if you're great, folks don't have a choice but to take notice. So that's what I think we did. And we were very grateful to get into Sundance. Sundance and be highlighted there.
That's awesome. Go ahead.
One thing I noticed in your story was that you said you did is that you didn't know how to produce, but you offered to do it anyway, which I think a lot of people, including myself, won't do. We feel like we have to master something or totally know it before we offer to do something, and I think that we all could, especially women, could take a page from that and just jump right into something and learn as we go. That's very inspiring.
I think that's great. One of the other things I love about that story is that you didn't wait for someone to tell you that had commercial appeal. You went out and put it up there, and the audience found you, and then Hollywood found you in a way. So, Lydia, I want to ask you, when you've had experience with the crowdfunding and with, making movies outside the system, what have been some of the things that have worked for you in that way?
Well, I think community building is a great way to approach anything when you're coming at something out of the box. And I have had the pleasure of developing a film called The Sisterhood of Night over the last 5 years, and the screenwriter Marilyn Fu is here. I want you to raise your hand. Marilyn's an awesome writer, and we were having trouble getting traction in the beginning. We had a first-time director, a female director, who had done some short films and was a photographer and a strong candidate, but we just were having, I think it was the combination, of the female team and the deeply female material. It's teenage girls. And we decided to launch a Kickstarter campaign because our movie dealt with girls and the internet and those themes, and we thought we would just try it out. And it was an incredible experience for us because it forced us into a position where we had to brand the film before we made it, which is what happens when you go on Kickstarter. You really are putting out there what your film is, and you haven't even made it yet. It really forces you to define your audience and target who those people are and figure out how you're going to reach them. And information comes back to you, which is the most beautiful part of it, because as we made the little movies, the little films that you put out there every week to try to keep people interested and keep people engaged, it was more branding, and we were getting feedback, and that actually informed what we would do the next week. And the spirit of community in doing that, and there were a lot of women directors that came out and supported us, and then we used that. We were like, hey, and it was a very interesting experience. I think that it's something that all of us who are independent have to really think about a lot, because you don't find your audience in one place anymore. And the way content is being created, the way it's being distributed, the way technology is changing, it's happening so fast. We have to really pay attention all the time. But I think it's the good news. I think it's the exciting news, because I think that this is part of why we're having so many conversations about gender equity right now across industries and across fields, is because I think women have responded to social media as an organizing tool.
Absolutely. I think that's true. And I think, another thing that is both positive but also challenging about both of those stories is that branding thing you mentioned. I mean, you're really, whether you're on Kickstarter, Indiegogo, or, putting something up on YouTube and trying to amass a viewership, you're having to think in a way like a marketer. You're having to think like a distributor before, rather than a content creator. It sort of makes an entrepreneur out of every storyteller in a different way. And I think that is a great opportunity, but it's not a skill set that everybody has. So I would really advise, and we've seen this a lot in the Sundance community, where many of the Sundance artists are using Kickstarter and using other platforms. If you don't have the instinctive marketing gene in you, and you don't feel comfortable building that audience and figuring out how to communicate that with that audience, partner. Find a producer that does. Find a marketer. Find somebody from the publicity world who wants to become a producer. There's so many ways to do what Lydia and Lena have done, I think. And I mean, Anna, you did it in a whole other scale in a way with a whole platform. But
it was. I don't think the costs were as high with the website as they are with the film. I mean, and also the funny thing about that site was that I was just told to create a women's site, and I was so frustrated with women's media that. The one that I created was just the one I wanted to read. And I know this sounds trite, but I do believe a lot of the time that you don't need to have marketing skills, it's just that you need to have a frustration or a hole that needs to be filled, or like a niche that you identify and go after. That you have to trust your intuition. And I'm not someone who runs around saying, trust your intuition all the time. I'm not like a Pollyanna, I'm not like an optimist. But I do believe that, especially with women's stories. Because there have been a lot of male stories told to the point where they're getting recycled all the time. But I feel like the good thing about the conversation that we're having is that there are a lot of women's stories that haven't been told yet. That there's so much potential that I'm very excited by.
I think that's true, and I think, Lena, there's a quote of yours I read, which I stupidly didn't bring up here, but I'm going to try to paraphrase it, which is, you didn't, it was about your show, 20s, that you didn't write that because you wanted to redress some inequity in terms of representation, but really because it was a story you wanted to tell, so very similar to what Anna just said.
Absolutely.
But I would take the other aside, just to this extent. It is a cluttered environment out there, like Nina said, and you're going to put up a Kickstarter video. It's going to be a good one or a bad one. It's gonna build your audience, or it's not. There is an element of marketing to it, no matter how distinctive your idea is. There's about translating that into a short form and using it and communicating in a two-way path with the audience.
Because most of them are bad. Unfortunately. And I know, because they send them to me, in my Facebook inbox, on Twitter, and stuff like that. And I think just a couple quick things. One thing, a lot of people send me stuff and they say, hey, share this. It's like, that's never the best way to go about it. When I was sharing, because we did a pilot presentation for 20s, which Justin directed, which you guys can find on YouTube, please check it out, 20s pilot presentation. The thing is, I said, if you like it, share it. And I think that's what really should be their approach. We did the same thing with Dear White People, the concept trailer. We said, if you like this, if this is something you want or want to see, share it. Not just, hey, here's something, please share it, because I have a brand, whether it be on Facebook and Twitter. We have a brand with Dear White People. We have a presence on Facebook and Twitter as well, and Tumblr and on YouTube as well. It's like we can't just share everything. So if something comes to us and it's really starting a conversation, and that's really, I think, another thing too. We, with Dear White People, we asked the question, remember when Black art house films used to be a thing? And people said, yes, it did used to be a thing. Like, there was a time when there wasn't one person that had the monopoly on Black cinema. It used to exist. We grew up in that time. For some reason, we've sort of taken a bunch of steps back. And now we're in sort of bamboozled is coming true. Sort of Spike Lee was a bit of a prophet, really. And so we sort of started the conversation there. And then it wasn't just Black people part of that conversation. It wasn't just, white people. It was not just men, it was women, it was everybody sort of saying, what has happened to the state of Black cinema? So I always tell people, if you have a movie idea or a concept trailer, it should always start with a question. It should start a dialogue. And the minute because that's why Washington Post went to write about us, or CNN. And it was because it was starting a conversation. The same thing with 20s is because 20s is about 3 Black girls in their 20s living their lives. Then it became the thing of, are you the new Black Lena Dunham? That was sort of the conversation, which I couldn't stop, but it's fine. I like Lena, she's a cool girl. We have the same name. We both write about our experiences in our lives. 20s angst. So the thing is, but whatever that conversation is, that's what you really want to do. And if it's not starting a conversation, then maybe it might be nice to go back to the drawing board, but you want to get people talking. You want to give them something to talk about. Just a little advice.
So I want to make sure we have time to get to questions, but before we do that, I want to run down the list. Maybe Nina, start with you. We talked about the pipeline. What we didn't talk about yet, and maybe we can do it when we come to questions, is getting to the point where you're even on the agency list or in the agency world or get an agent. We haven't talked about the very, very early side of the pipeline, which often comes out of festivals, so we can if that's of interest to the group. But in your experience, either for you or for one of your clients, Nina, have you experienced an obstacle in that pipeline and a roadblock? And could you describe how you've seen a roadblock successfully overcome? We've talked now about a few things of going around the system or.
Yeah, I'm going to answer this in a way, I could give you many examples, but I'm going to try to give you an example that